And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no. No, but she was still in bed when that happened.
And this was after the conversation?
Yeah, it was between 4 and 5 a.m.
Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no. No, but she was still in bed when that happened. She told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids with her.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. I hope you're enjoying your Friday and you've got a weekend to look forward to. In the news today around Chris Watts, the media sort of been talking about Chris Watts being ordered to pay $6 million and then going from there to saying that he's agreed to pay $6 million. It's interesting what's not in the media narrative. Doesn't seem to be a discussion anymore about the Criminal Confessions documentary. There doesn't seem to be any discussion about the book by the psychologist on Chris Watts. And I find all of that really fascinating, is what the media choose as their reality and what's not. I mean, obviously Chris Watts can't pay that $6 million, so him agreeing to pay it isn't really news. What's also amazing in the Criminal Confessions thing is, for the first time, we've heard quite a lot of first-hand accounts from, for example, Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Tammy Lee. So it's like brand new material, and yet the media's already moved on to, I guess, other things. In this episode, I meant to do breaking into Chris Watts as a third episode, dealing with the polygraph and all that kind of thing. I mean, one aspect that's really fascinating with that is Coda the night before took Watts through a statement where step by step he had Watts write down his version of events. And interestingly, we've never seen that handwritten document from Chris Watts. We haven't seen his version written down in the discovery. You can see in the video from the first interrogation with Coda, a couple of pages right in front of Watts. Looks like at least 2 pages that Watts has sort of filled in, and besides that you have Coda with a looks like a legal pad, also kind of making notes. And so step by step they're going through that timeline and through Watts' story, and then Coda is sort of very meticulously questioning him on every detail. And at one point Watts goes through the part about that they started having a conversation about, and then he says interrupts himself and says putting the house up for sale. So it's just interesting how he corrects himself there, and then he also refers again to proceeding with the separation, and the order I find with that is very interesting. I mean, wouldn't most people talk about it the other way around? You know, we're getting divorced and then the house is gonna be up for sale, not the other way around. But for Watts, it's in that priority of house first and separation second, and we know that he was never going to go ahead with the separation. He was going to go ahead with selling the house. I mean, he started that process that morning. As much as I've been wanting to deal with the polygraph, in the third episode dealing with the third segment, which I call Breaking into Chris Watts, I felt like there are a few little details that I want to not gloss over, so I didn't want to jump the gun. And so in this episode we will be dealing with just one of those details. Before we get to that, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, ring the bell if you want notifications, and let's get started.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no. No, but she was still in bed when that happened.
And this was after the conversation?
Yeah, it was between 4 and 5 a.m.
Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no. No, but she was still in bed when that happened.
And this was
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say? And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say? And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
Well, she went back, she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids. Take the kids with her.
So when we're dealing with criminal psychology, what we're really doing is we're studying responses, we're studying the wiring inside the mind of the particular suspect. We are looking for the ways that the responses deviate from what we would say would be or should be the responses of a reasonable man or reasonable person in that situation, specifically a reasonable innocent person. But the much deeper level to that is the way that one looks at the criminal psychology of the person, the identity that we recognize as Chris Watts, and we start to understand why he's answering in a certain way and how it is aligning with a pattern of responses. And so that is when we're dealing with criminal psychology, not just looking for little aberrations. Yeah, we're actually looking at pattern recognition and small little nuances. Now in this episode, it's not, I wouldn't really call it rocket science. What we're going to talk about here isn't incredibly significant. For me, it's just interesting. It's not like going to blow the lid off this case or anything like that. It's just an interesting observation. And it's a relatively fresh observation compared to the stuff that's been analyzed before. If you want to watch the original footage, the original audio, the original sound, and it is important to watch these together in sync, please visit my blog post on Crime Rocket. It is and then did you see her before she went to work? Watch and listen to Chris Watts' reaction. And so I've also provided a little bit of analysis there and also a transcript to what he says exactly. and then additional information. By the way, if you go into Crime Rocket and you're not sure how to navigate, just enter the name of the story that I give you here in the search bar. It's a little bit scrolling down, maybe past just the first book cover on the right hand margin, or you can just Google the name of the title and Crime Rocket and it should take you there. So the reason I want to highlight this is at 5:30 in Oxygen's clip, Officer Matthew James, who incidentally was the same officer who ultimately arrested Watts late on Wednesday night, and he was also the same officer who called Watts later that same afternoon, the same afternoon that they're talking sort of below the stairs, on August 13th at 21:12. His handwritten notes on a yellow pad actually appear in the discovery. It's in the 40th tranche published on Crime Rocket as well. But James was the officer who's talking to him here, and who, as I say, is the officer who ultimately arrested Chris Watts. And he's asking Watts a series of questions here. Oxygen did a great job in Season 3, Episode 1 of Criminal Confessions by juxtaposing two body cam perspectives during this line of questioning, along with subtitles to the conversation. So what you see is, at times you see Officer James's body cam perspective, and at other times you see Officer Coonrod, who at this particular time isn't talking, is just standing next to Chris Watts. But by this clever use of editing, by sort of syncing it, you kind of get a nice sense of proportion and perspective for what is really going on at that moment. And I really think the Chris Watts case and all the body cam deserves this kind of professional documentary approach. And so to get to the quoted text, and to get to the part that I'm emphasizing here, this is where True Crime Rocket Science sort of comes into its own a little bit, is you can play that audio over and over again, and you may sort of have a few thoughts sort of bubbling to the surface, but where is it really taking you? So what that Watts said that, what does it mean? That's really the insight that you want to get to. And what we want to do when we dealing with just a snippet of text like this, just a snippet from the transcript, is how does it relate to other things that he said at other times? And so what I've already sort of primed you guys a little bit is to show you that when he spoke to Coda, and this was on the Tuesday night, so a day later, when he referred to this conversation that he had with Shanann, he said they first spoke about selling the house, then about the separation, right? That's the order that he puts it in. Now, you might not think that's important, except whenever Watts refers to it, he sticks to that order. So if you go to the transcript, James says, "And what was the conversation this morning you guys had?" Bear in mind this was Monday afternoon, so it was just early in the day. It's not very difficult for Watts to remember. And how Watts responds, and he's sort of swaying, is he says, well, it was about us selling the house and the separation. And there again he says selling the house first and the separation. As I say, the priority in that answer is telling. First they talked about the house, then the separation. It's the same exact way he expressed it to Coonrod on the loft landing. And that was a little bit earlier, just after Coonrod had entered the house. And then Officer James asked a great question. He says, how did she take that? So how did Shanann respond to this discussion about selling the house and the separation? And Coonrod had asked something in a similar way earlier. It said, how's the separation going? Was it civil? And Watts had sort of chuckled. So James is taking another bite at that sort of cherry, asking what's about it. And so then how Watts responds to this question, this difficult question, how did Shanann respond to you confronting her at last? You're an introvert, you don't like confrontation, you don't like, you don't want to admit this problem that is going on in your marriage, and it's a significant step, and now they are confronting Watts with this thing that he doesn't really want to deal with in his own marriage. And while he's saying this, Officer Coonrod glances down at his phone besides Watts, And Watts answers, we were both very emotional and still crying. And so through that answer, Watts is sort of sketching a kind of traumatic exchange where it's almost like they were both crying, that it was such an emotional time that they were both sort of crying about it. But you would expect something like that if it was true. It's noises in the middle of the night. It's crying and talking between a couple that are about to break up their family at 4-5 o'clock in the morning. Was that not going to wake up the neighbors? Weren't the neighbors going to hear that? Wasn't the dog going to hear that? Weren't the children going to hear that if they were still alive? And if you bear in mind what Watts said during the sermon on the porch, he said, it wasn't like an argument, but we had an emotional conversation. Let's leave it at that. And this is quite a fine line that he's treading. He's trying to say, we had an emotional argument that was so quiet that no one raised their voice, that no one heard it, that it didn't disturb anyone. It wasn't an argument. And then you must ask yourself, if you think about Shanann, and you think Chris Watts said to her, Shanann, I want to get a separation and we need to move, or we need to get rid of the house. Do you think Shanann would have just said, oh, okay, well, that's too bad, kind of thing? And if people did know Shanann, they knew that she would go directly from that point to what's going on. Are you cheating on me? Are you having an affair? Is this why this is happening? And what's the answer? That is exactly why it's happening. Also the finances, but it's primarily because Watts has found someone else that he needs to separate from Shanann and sort out the house, sort out the living arrangements. And then that brings us to James saying, did you see her before she went to work? And Watts is sort of caught off guard by this question. He's sort of stunned by it, and he sort of chokes out an answer and sort of says, right? And unfortunately James then asks him another question and said, did you say anything to her? So the question that sort of wrong-footed Chris Watts was, did you see her before you went to work? That's such a fantastic question because it's addressing the two-faced theory of that there was no talking, there was no sex, there was no Shanann going up to bed, there was no Shanann changing, there was no Shanann, getting into bed. And so this question of did he see her before he went to work is really addressing a very, very difficult aspect for Chris Watts, which is the fact that he saw her and how he saw her is effectively saying, did you murder her? And he did. And so when the officers asks him, did you see her before you went to work? Of course he did. And that's an uncomfortable thing. It triggers his mind. It triggers the visuals, the feelings, the sights, the sounds, the whole crime, the whole visceral, tactile experience of it is triggered by that crime. And so Watts can't even really answer it. Is sort of, as I say, is sort of caught off guard. He probably feels like an electrical pang through his body, through his fingers. And as I say, unfortunately, James should just not have said anything after that. He should have let Watts answer on his own time and in his own way. But James then sort of comes back to his question and says, did you say anything to her? So it becomes from did you see her, and if he'd left it at that, Watts would have to talk about that. What did he see? And that would maybe be difficult to explain. Instead James then reframes it to did you say anything to her? And Watts is still wrong-footed by that original question, which is why he's stuttering, and then he says she went back like so if you take that answer, he's actually, the beginning of that answer is actually responding to the original question, did you see her? That's what's going through his mind. And so he says she went back like and I'm not sure what he's referring to here. He may be referring to what that sort of fiction answer that he had, that either Shanann went back to bed, or that, because in his version, after he eventually confessed, he said that after he killed Shanann on I think Cece's bed, he said he then carried her to their bed, and put her in the bed. I don't believe that's true, but I think the reason he said that was because of the sheet wrapped around her. There might have been some fibers, or some evidence on the bed sheet showing that kind of connection in terms of the evidence. So that may be the reason that he talks about that. But even him saying she went back, it might be this is a bit of a stretch, though. It's probably not this, but it could be that when Watts attacked her, she went back, as in she may have sort of fallen backwards or whatever it was. In any event, that may have been like a subconscious answer, and then Watts corrects himself and he says, she told me, and this is where Watts cottons on to James's question about not what did you see, but what did you say. And then instead of him saying what he said to her, he says that she told me she was going to a friend's house, and then he flaps out his hand. So can you see how in Watts' answer there, he doesn't actually answer. He doesn't answer what he saw, except to say she went back, and then he corrects himself, and he doesn't really say what he said, he says what she said. And we can see that this is a rehearsed thing in his mind. He's referring to something that he's thought about, and that's what he's reverting to. What I would have liked to have seen the police ask is, what exactly did you say? Like, what, not the third person version of, well, I said this and then she said that. No, say exactly, okay, you, Chris Watts, what exactly did you say? How long were you talking? And then how did she answer? What were some of the exact sentences she said? And you can twist the suspect's arm in this respect, because you can say, you were the last person to see her, you were the last person to speak to her, so what the heck did she actually say? What the heck did you guys say to each other? Not one sentence of, okay, we want to sell the house and get a separation, okay, that's fine, and then what did she say? Okay, I'm going to go to a friend's house. Not that vanilla version. Tell me exactly what she said. And so how long did you have this conversation? 5 minutes. Well, let's go through that 5-minute conversation. Do you see what I'm getting at? And that's where you're going to get pay dirt in terms of this. So this correction mid-sentence indicates, as I say, Watts is giving a rehearsed answer. He was going to say perhaps that she went back to bed, but decides on the latter version, going to a friend's house, being more appropriate. The friend's storyline is supposed to deflect attention, investigative and otherwise, off him. And that's why it's so important that he keeps reverting to it. She was going to a friend's house. She was going to a friend's house. Who's the friend? I don't know who the friend is. And that's then where the investigation is supposed to be led. And that's the way that he's guiding it and pushing it. And why should he be concerned about Shanann? She went there by choice. He doesn't know what's happened, and that's part of the whole ruse. It's not that he doesn't have remorse, it's that's part of the criminal psychology in gaming the people around him. That he doesn't know what's happened, that's why he doesn't know how to feel about it, and he wants the investigators also not to know how to feel about it. And through the way that he's appropriating Shanann's story on her behalf, he's saying Shanann knew how she felt about everything, and so she left. And then the question mark then is on everybody else. Doesn't that make sense? Wouldn't she have done that under the circumstances? And the answer is a lot of people would have. It did make sense. And so interestingly, Watts doesn't stop talking. He's still trying to cover for himself, and so he sort of mutters, and be with the kids, take the kids over there. And there again he slips a little bit. It's another self-correction. Anytime you have a self-correction, it's you've said something that you maybe meant to say, but it's revealing something that you didn't mean to reveal, and so you correct it, and that then reveals the psychology underneath. If you think about it, be with the kids makes no sense. Why would Shanann want to be with the kids? I mean, the kids were at home. He's almost trying to infer that someone took the kids somewhere else, and then so Shanann wanted to be with them. And in a weird way, in terms of the original psychology, it is true. Watts put the kids somewhere else, and he wanted Shanann to be with them in death. He wanted Shanann to be with the children at the well site in death. And if you think about it, Watts was babysitting the children. He was with the children the weekend before they died. So he was while he was premeditating this crime, he's with them. He's seeing their faces, and it's a horrible thought, but he's seeing their faces, hearing their laughter, and he's thinking at the same time how he's going to get rid of them and how it's going to work. Even when they're talking to him, these thoughts are going through his mind. But Shanann's not part of that picture. I'm just talking in terms of what he's seeing in front of him, because she's not there. And so it makes sense in terms of just the psychology that while he's very conscious of what he's going to do with them and where he's going to put them, and think about it, he went to a lot of trouble with their bodies and how he got them to where they went. One tank for each of the children, but for Shanann something else. And so it was like this thing of Shanann needed to be with the kids. Do you see what I'm saying? But Shanann would never have thought of it that way. Shanann would take the kids somewhere. Shanann wouldn't be with the kids unless you're thinking of it from the criminal perspective. So here he comes uncomfortably close to the truth, and he is muttering and stuttering here, and the truth is that he wanted Shanann to be with the kids, away, in a grave, and that's where she was at that moment. Again, think of the sequence and subconscious psychology in Be With the Kids versus Shanann taking the kids over there, which she didn't do. He took them over there. And this is what you're talking about when you're talking about getting into the criminal mind, dealing with the criminal psychology. So we get back to the transcript. James says, "Oh, she told you she's taking the kids to a friend's house." And then Watts answers, "Yeah." She didn't say who though. Watts, "Yeah." "Oh, no," and he's quite confident about that. "Oh, no, I don't know who she went to, because there is no answer to that." "No, but she was still in bed when that happened." And so that's also quite interesting, is that he volunteers that Shanann was in bed when he left, and I think he said that the kids were sleeping as well when he left. But the point that stood out for me when he said that, when he said, "No, but she was still in bed when that happened," you see his hand in front of his chest, and it's sort of in a similar gesture to the one in a kind of a claw that matches his original role-playing gesture in the cubicle at 18:04:56, which was a couple of hours before his arrest. Watts's words, and often when open-ended questions are asked, or when the police ask very vague questions, you often get amazing answers. And so when Watts says something like, "She was still in bed when that happened," when that happened is, in his version to the police, is saying, well, when we spoke, right? But in criminal psychology, when that happened is actually referring to when the crime happened. Now you could argue that what this is pointing to is that when that happened, when the crime happened, it was in bed. And that wouldn't be a bad argument. But my counter argument and my intuition into this case would say, I don't believe there was any discussion, there was no talking, there was no sex, there was no confrontation, because the whole point of what's killing Shanann was to not get divorced, not have a confrontation, not have an argument, not have an emotional end to this whole thing. It was for him to take control in his way. And the way that Watts takes control is the coward's way out, which is to cheat, to sneak, to attack from behind, to be in the shadows. It's the introvert's way of dealing with something which is slyly and as a shadow and coming from behind. So I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but as you start piecing together the criminal psychology and all the little nuances, the mosaic starts broadening into a very big canvas, and then you see how lots of parts of the pattern resonate with other parts of the pattern, and then it really all fits together very well. And that's why as soon as you have something like the second confession or even the third, you can see how those things don't line up. The ribbons running through the puzzle, when you take certain pieces out and you replace them, those ribbons don't align anymore. And that's the kind of thing that I would like you guys to see and recognize and get on board with. And you start understanding all of this stuff when you study one criminal to exhaustion, and then you study another criminal to exhaustion. And what you realize is some of the criminal psychology between criminals is very much the same. So in the Patrick Frazee case, you also had him saying she disappeared. I don't know where she went. And you can see how a lot of what is said there, it's a similar scenario of she went somewhere. In Frazee's case, she went to her grandmother, because her grandmother was sick, and that kind of thing. And that is quite easy to sort of find out. Just call the grandmother. Did Kelsey arrive there? It's the same sort of psychology. But where it becomes really interesting is when you find all those similarities and then you find the little areas where they're not similar. For example, the way that Watts executed the crime and the way that Frazee did. The fact that Frazee's little 1-year-old child was in the home when he killed Kaylee's mother, and yet, so in other words, so he saved the child, but really harmed the mother, whereas Chris Watts harmed everybody, but in a totally different way. So I'm not going to take it further than that. One thing I did want to just touch on again is, this whole idea of Chris Watts agreeing to pay $6 million in a civil suit. That may seem absurd, and Chris Watts certainly doesn't have the capacity to pay that. But what that $6 million figure does nevertheless refer to is the amount of money that could be made from selling book rights and movie rights and TV rights and all sorts of rights to Watts' story. So there's millions to be made in this respect, and that's I think a part that one needs to sort of recognize is Chris Watts won't see that money, but there are millions at stake in terms of his story. And in a weird way, I'm in a funny situation where I gave an interview actually a couple of years ago, and because I've started a YouTube channel, I contacted the producers and just wanted to know, what has happened to that footage? Can I buy it? What is happening? And they gave some really interesting information that it's going to be on Netflix early next year. I'm not going to say any more about it right now. I'll probably deal with it in more detail on Patreon. But for now, I think those interested in this episode and just getting a bit more information on it, please visit the blog Officer Matthew James's Call to Chris Watts. There he also talks about the questions of infidelity and all that kind of thing. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.